Ads used to interrupt our lives. Today, they do that and they learn who we are. It's been leaked that OpenAI has kept their entire backend infrastructure ready to serve ads, the very business model that fuels a large part of the internet. But how is it that ads work, and why is this a really significant shift? Not just in the narrative of AI, but also in the effects of society. Let's talk about it.
And if you haven't already, remember to hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Welcome back to the Rethinking Tech podcast. I'm Aparna.
And I'm Harinda.
Our podcast breaks the topic of tech apart,
covering the surprising connections to geopolitics, business, and ethics.
We're both humanitarians, and I'm a lawyer currently freezing in Toronto.
I'm a former entrepreneur, globetrotter, and unfortunately also freezing because our heating broke down.
Every week, we break down the hottest tech topics that you need to know about. This week, we're going to be talking about an industry that is particularly near and dear to both of our hearts, the ad space, the ad tech industry. But why are we talking about it today? Why is it relevant? We'll also talk about the ad space in 3 separate segments. The first, the tech industry. The second, the geopolitical implications behind it all. And lastly, my favorite section, the ethical dilemmas that the ad industry brings with it. Let's get into it. Harinda, why are we talking about the ad industry today?
The reason is multi-pronged, right? Let's start with the advertising world, which was usually 70 to 80% dominated by Google and Meta. And this is now starting to change with regards to the way that traffic flows on the internet. The reason that companies and individuals and organizations use advertising is because it receives high engagement views for what they're trying to show. And that in itself is really important. But when attention changes on the internet, how is it that advertisers need to shift? And that's the discussion that we need to understand. Because ads have been the baseline for technology for a long time, not just Google and Meta, but also subsidizing things like TVs and cars and even Netflix. So when we talk about ads, we need to break it down into attention, engagement, and then a subsequent action, because that's what advertisers want. They want people to either buy their product or service, they want to be engaged into whatever their cause could be, or they want those votes because political ads are such an important piece. Many people don't realize how important ads are in society today. We talk about Meta, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all of these other social media platforms as though they are just social media platforms, but they are advertising platforms in fundamental aspects. And what is really important is when we think backwards in time, when we look at the scandals like the Cambridge Analyticas, we understand that ads actually have the ability to shift our society. And then we take things that Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump were saying that are also forcing perception to be manipulated. And what their statements are saying is, let's take TikTok and let's separate it to have a US entity. And they're publicly stating how important this is because the ability to market to Americans in a separate architecture and the ability to have messaging that caters to them is something that's important to shift mindsets. And, we have examples also on the other side with the Arab Spring, with the Nepalese revolt, but all of these are really fueled by the ad architecture. And so all of this is much more than just a display ad or a video ad that you see during the Super Bowl, because it really changes your daily life.
And it's also important to really understand what the purpose of an ad is, right? Like, let's define it, even though all of us likely know what it is since we've been bombarded with it since the age of 2 months, maybe even when we're still in our mother's wombs. And so what is an ad? It's attention, user attention or consumer attention plus engagement of some form, so interaction, resulting in action. And as much as we will talk about the ad industry and what it is today, we would be remiss to not talk about how the ad industry has evolved, especially in the last 30 years. It went from originally having offline ads. You remember those newspaper clippings? We would get flyers and usually toss them to the recycling bin, to then the digital shift, like the search and programmatic buying of ads and real-time auctions. And now I would argue that we're very much in the platform era. So you mentioned the social feeds, you mentioned mobile, but also there's like CTV, retail media, and AI. I mean, these platforms, I'm thinking specifically about OpenAI's platform, we're now starting to hear rumors about there being ads being placed within this platform that many have started using for, yes, searching for basic answers to questions, but also for therapy, also for companionship. So we're starting to see ads really everywhere.
One of the things that I've always been fascinated with is the architecture that drives advertising, especially digital advertising. If you previously wanted to advertise for a newspaper, you usually had to go to the newspaper or one of their serving partners and pay for an advertisement, provide the language, and it was such a manual process. But now you have all of these different formats that are very clear cut for different devices, different locations, different places, and different reasons. Then you have the ability to serve ads down to the individual impression, which is unbelievable if you think about what that really means for how much time we spend online. And then we have the democratization, which means that now everybody can run ads. That's not just the large political parties or large companies. We as individuals, if we want to run an ad in front of 300 people, we just have to pay a few pennies and we got it. And so those three things are really important when we start shifting towards this discussion on AI. Because on the one side, AI helps for tech companies serve ads better. But on the other side, when we talk about LLMs and when we talk about ChatGPT or any of their competitors, ads are now a different way of using traffic. And this distinction is something that we need to analyze deeply.
Let's get into it. Let's talk tech, because in today's day and age, you can't talk ad industry without talking tech. But it's important to ground our discussion in what the value of this overall market is. And based on numbers that we have from 2024, numbers which were up 7.3% since 2023, the entire ad industry is worth approximately 1.1 trillion US dollars. And that's across all the forms of advertising. So keep that number in mind. Keep in mind how large this number is as we get into today's discussion. So, tech implications. You can't talk advertising without talking about tech. And why is that? It's really because tech, again, over the last 3 decades, has changed advertising as society knows it forever in 4 fairly fundamental ways. The first is probably the most obvious to everyone, which is personalization and targeting. Advertisers have moved from demographic buys of huge swaths of neighborhood flyers to now focusing on exactly where their advertising products or advertising attempts should go based on behavior, interest, and micro-targeting using large data sets and machine learning, which is what we've seen even more of over the last decade. We've seen things like cookies to fingerprinting to mobile identifiers. But what are these things? I mean, we've all been on a web page where we are asked if we want to permit cookies or not. And most people, frankly, say yes because they couldn't be bothered to click through the 17 different buttons you then need to click through to say no. But what does that mean? It means that you have now allowed that website to target you, to place a small identifier on your computer, on your device, so that when you leave that platform, when you leave that website and go to a different website, that original website will be able to see where you've gone, and through that, start to piece together your identity. Start to piece together like, oh, Aparna visited this website, and then she went to this website, and then this website. She is clearly on the hunt for a flight deal from Toronto to Mexico. So the next time she goes on aircanada.com, why don't we give that information to Air Canada so that they can up their prices, all because I pressed yes to accepting a cookie on a Black Friday, Cyber Monday deal on an unrelated website. This is just how information travels now across the World Wide Web. And it's something that if we're not careful about, we are buying into. So that's the first one. The second, and Harinda, you mentioned this earlier, is the programmatic and real-time bidding. So this entire space is absolutely wild because a large majority of society does not realize that this is how the ad industry works. They don't realize that there's an ad inventory and it's auctioned in literal milliseconds, which has enabled scale, but also really made complex intermediary relationships, which make it I think now deliberately difficult to get into the space and navigate what's happening. The third, data flows, third-party sharing. I kind of touched on this in the cookie example, but we can now share data among publishers, networks, data brokers, and measurement vendors. Sometimes, unfortunately, oftentimes without the consent of the users or the consumers of whose data is being shared. And lastly, and this is a piece that I think we'll see more of in the coming future, new data sources like retail media, CTV signals, and connected devices, now allowing companies, allowing corporations to paint an even richer picture of who you are as a consumer. Now, the app you have, my Lululemon app, which is connected to my Lululemon profile, it kind of just goes off when I'm close to a Lululemon store. They'll tell me, like, hey, Aparna's in the vicinity. Hey, Aparna, you're close to a Lululemon store. Let's just go in. Let's see what the new leggings are. They now know more about me. They know where I live. They know my shopping habits. They know what hours I go out, which is frankly kind of creepy.
I think also what's really important about this is that the purpose behind this is not because they need to store your information. It's that the more data that they have about you, the more personalized the ads can become. Higher personalization means higher revenue for advertising platforms. And that's one of the reasons why they go after so much data collection. I remember in 2015, when I was doing my research for my doctoral thesis, I found out that Facebook at the time, this is in 2015, was collecting 52,000 data points on each and every one of us for every transaction that we were making. That's huge when you think about how many people were onboarding onto social media platforms, now in the billions of users and many, many more data points. But that is why when we talk about cookies, when we talk about tracking and specifically fingerprinting is such an important part because many people think that if an advertiser knows your name, then this is a violation of privacy. Actually, they don't need to know your name. Your name can be anything, including a series of numbers and exclamation marks. But as long as they can understand that individual or you as an individual and all of your preferences and serve an ad for you, that has much more value than knowing your name. When I then start relaying this onto AI, this is the place what I find really interesting, right? So OpenAI is now creating a layer to slow down the process of you interacting with the internet. And I say this because there's some really interesting statistics that I ran into. ChatGPT traffic, so traffic meaning people using ChatGPT, generates 4.4 times more engaged audiences than regular web traffic. And this makes so much sense. How many times does somebody go onto Google and just randomly click on the links to see what they're looking for? Or randomly click because they're not finding what they're looking for? And I think that's one really important thing. Also, referral traffic from ChatGPT to websites has dropped 52% by mid 2025. And what that really means is that people are no longer leveraging Google. They're no longer leveraging browsers as a means to find what they're looking for. They're using this new LLM based chatbot, not just ChatGPT, there's many other options. But that in itself means the way that advertisers are going to come after you for that data needs to change. It needs to evolve.
Which is really interesting because recently, as recent as yesterday, there were rumors, substantiated rumors, that ChatGPT OpenAI was going to be releasing that ad layer, if you will, to its chat feature. Why do you think that is? They're a major player now in the tech space, but I wouldn't say that they're at all a major player in the ad industry, at least not yet. And my question is, do you think that they're entering the ad space because it is one attempt by them to try to monetize and generate revenue, even hopefully generate profit, because God knows they need that right now? Or do you think that there's a deeper situation at play? Do you think this has always been part of the plan?
So there's a convergence of events happening right now. We know that AI, there has been a lot of criticism with regards to the investment going in and the poor returns or profits that are being generated. The second thing is that there are no clear business models of how this AI is going to generate the profits that these investments require. For all the trillions of dollars of data centers across the globe and all of the improvements on model updates and all of the infrastructure that's required, we're talking 10 years and multiple trillions of dollars. And yet we're seeing that all of these tech companies that are just AI focused are generating single digit $1 billion revenues. I think OpenAI is the only one that has gone into double digits and in the low teens. That in itself is a challenge. The other piece is also that ad tech revenue and the business models behind ad tech are probably not just the most sophisticated, but the ones that are proven. These are the tech companies that generate billions and billions of dollars of revenues, super high margins, above 85% in many cases. And that means that they are able to create cash reserves and really justify their own expenditures in AI. Whereas AI only companies like the OpenAIs or even Perplexities, etc., they are still struggling to be able to turn the story around. And so I think all of these convergences, along with the heavy, heavy criticism that AI companies have been having, are really getting a lot of these folks, especially Sam Altman, to try to respond to it with show us a business model that works. But I think the interesting part is the fact that then the very next day they decided to rescind this, and there's been a code red by Sam Altman saying we need to do so much more work on the chatbot side to make it so much better that the ad infrastructure is something that we're going to slow down our work on. What do you think about that?
I think that they being OpenAI had never made an official announcement about releasing an ad enhanced platform. Altman had to rescind the statement because he had never made a statement. OpenAI had never come out and said this. This is already a huge PR move to introduce such a significant change to their current offering that it has to be very carefully and delicately addressed. And right now, OpenAI can't really afford to make it seem like they're turning away even a little bit from the quality of their product. Google's latest Gemini release has been incredibly well received to the point where many are now actually switching over from OpenAI to Gemini just because of the quality of the product. And to your point, that likely is because Google just has a much bigger wallet funded by its Google Ads platform, which is the largest in the entire space. And they can afford to do this. So for Altman to come out and say, hey, no, it's actually something that we're not planning on right now, or even if it is, we've decided to focus our efforts more on quality, he had to do that. That doesn't mean that we're not going to see a future version of ChatGPT that has ads integrated into it in some capacity or another. It just means OpenAI was not happy with how the public found out about this, so they said that they're going to put the brakes on it. Whether that's true, whether that's actually what's going to happen, or whether this is just a PR stunt, I think we'll find out more in 2026.
In my sense is that they are not going to slow down. I think that there's a distinction between the PR statements that are being made and what is needed at the company. So ads infrastructure and ad performance is something that we know is a cash cow for most tech companies. We also know that ChatGPT and specifically OpenAI across their different tech stack and their users have been stealing traffic from Google. So if that's the case, the ads network is actually a clever play. This is the place that they can turn their story around from a financial perspective. And if I were to break down what are the things that ChatGPT or any LLM company requires, they need demographic information, which they have. Every single user is broken down into their prompts, into their needs, and into their desires. So this is something that they have. Ad integration, super easy. They've been scraping the internet, so they've skipped the citation part and they've been able to generate the results that are required. The personalization, that's exactly what an LLM does. Generating compelling ad copy, also what an LLM does. Working on videos, photos, audio, so they are multimodal. So we know that they have all of this infrastructure. The only thing that they need to build out, in my opinion, is whether ads work. And this is something that is also a very contentious space. But frankly speaking, there's been a debate in the ad community about privacy and safety versus ad performance, because you need more data and you need to breach privacy in order for ads to perform better. And so as a result, we've seen legislation attempting to reduce highly personalized ads in a way to reduce the performance. And we saw Apple do this. We saw many other companies being forced to make moves in this direction. But nonetheless, the vast majority of the infrastructure is there. They just need to actually switch most of it on and start charging advertisers.
You bring up a really good point as to, do people want this? Is this beneficial? Are we just talking about something that actually is not an issue? Because what does it mean? What does it mean to have a more targeted ad, a more personalized ad, and frankly, an ad that probably you would engage better with and care more about? Well, for users, yes. If we turn on all of the personalization capabilities, then what does this mean? It means that yes, you will definitely see more relevant ads, but it also means more surveillance and the potential for erroneous inference about who you are as a person, what your preferences are. But it goes deeper than that because how much information do we as individuals really want companies to have about us? Does it make sense for them to know these details about us? Does it make sense for them to know when my Tesla vehicle pulls into my driveway, when it goes to Tim Hortons? That's a nod to Canada. And when it comes back, no, there's no need for Tesla to then have that information and send me targeted advertisement for my future coffee orders. Or is there? You know what? There's some people who will sit on the other side and be like, hey, great, if I can save 20 cents on my double double, that's perfect. It really comes down to personal preference. And I think that's exactly it. It's being allowed to have a choice and say, no, I don't want this, or yes, I do. And frankly, most of us don't get that choice. We might think we have that choice, but we really don't.
One thing you made me realize is that while we know AI does hallucinations, we also know that search does the same. And in fact, there's been some really interesting research that came out years ago about the proportion of 70-30. So when you do a search, whether it's on Google or even on Pinterest, 20% of the results must adhere to your search criteria. But 30% are actually really valuable for them not to, in such a way that it provides discovery. So you are able to start looking outside of your search criteria in that way that you are maybe willing to start navigating in a different direction. And this allows you to stay on the internet, to be able to scroll through Pinterest, not for your original search criteria, but in a continuous flow, always on that platform. And the reason I mention this is hallucinations do something quite similar. It presents information that is not directly correct as opposed to directly relevant. So it still stays relevant, but in the same way, it continues to keep you in the loop of interacting with the technology. And so I think that this is a really important and powerful aspect of AI in general, because it'll basically allow you to make more seamless interactions with the ads. One question that I wanted to tackle is if AI and companies like OpenAI and Perplexity and all of the others are going to start transitioning towards an ad infrastructure, what is this going to mean for things like democracy? We've talked about this in the past, but how do you see this parlaying, especially when we talk about things like hallucinations, disinformation, misinformation, all baked into what is being served to you with AI?
Well, when you question the impact of the ad industry or of AI on democracy, the real root cause of that is election interference or influence, depending on how you want to see it, and political ads, because the political ads are the ones that can really sway how a population is going to vote. It's not going to be whether you buy the latest Crest white strips or whatever. This targeted online advertising platform that has now become used for political purposes is absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's nothing new. Again, if you look at old forms of ad media and the current forms, we used to see political ads all the time in the newspaper. So it only makes sense that we would also now see them in platforms and as targeted ads. But I don't think we really realized the impact of social media advertising until we saw Cambridge Analytica and what it was capable of. I mean, that was back in 2016. We're almost 10 years out from that. And I don't think anything has changed in terms of regulation. If anything, we've just seen more and more countries learn from that entire, I don't want to say scandal, but entire situation and use it to further their own political agenda. Online political ad spending in the 2024 US election totaled at least $1.9 billion on the four largest platforms that actually publish their data. So these are the platforms that are Meta, X, Google, and Snap. And that's just for the US presidential election, which, yes, you know what? The US election has a lot of money. There's a lot of donor money. It makes a lot of sense. But every other country's politician is also looking at this because why would you not use these platforms to your benefit? And so, yes, I would say to answer your question that targeted advertising is definitely manipulating the political game as we know it, but I don't know if it's any different than what we were seeing before. It maybe actually achieves its goals more, but I don't think that it's necessarily something that society hasn't seen before or dealt with in this way.
I think that that's one of the places that's going to be harder and harder to detect as we start consuming more information from AI. We're going to essentially start consuming more lies through AI as well. Let's say undetectable lies. That's the hard part, is that when we are presented information, the vast majority of users on most LLMs, they don't verify what is being said. In fact, they don't even question the LLM itself to cite the sources. And so when we talk about things like democracy or even safety, what's going to end up happening is we're going to have a closer relationship with our LLMs. We're now talking about bots and agents that are going to start doing work for us. So essentially automating our entire workflows. We're giving ourselves that liberty to allow machines, bots, and AI to run large and important parts of our lives, including our decision making. I think that it's going to be really interesting to observe in 5 or 10 years. What is it that we are going to use as a democratic value? Are you a well informed citizen? Or are you just an informed citizen from AI? And this is a huge distinction to make because is truth one of the key markers for you to be informed? Or is it somebody's opinion? Because this is the direction that the world is going in. A lot of these almost philosophical debates now are going to become realities, and AI and LLMs are going to be masking it through a very cute chat interface.
Such a good point that you raised that at least before on digital platforms like Google search, when people were searching for information, they would have to go through the links and actually click on them. And then just by choosing which link you're clicking on, you are also then judging whether or not this is a valid source of news, valid source of intel, versus now, to your point, when you go to ChatGPT, many people don't question whether what they're being told is actually accurate. They take it as gospel. So that entire subconscious but very real process of verifying whether this is a real link, whether this is a real source, or whether you should go back and maybe check a couple more, that entire process has been completely removed. So not if, but when ads are integrated into OpenAI's platform, and then we'll see other AI platforms follow suit, I am sure, then what does that mean for us? What type of advertising are we eating up? Because before, it was obvious with the ads. They were more obvious, at least. But now, it won't be obvious at all. And my question for you is, when the product is free, like it currently is with ChatGPT, but paid for by opaque profiling, is it really free? And what is the cost of it?
This is so similar to advertising, right? They always say when you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. And in essence, this is one of the things that OpenAI and every LLM is trying to figure out. How do you monetize the product? Now, the product at the moment is focused on the ChatGPT module, but frankly, it's more about who is in front of ChatGPT because that's where the value comes. So if all users aren't moving to Plus, which anyway is a losing bet because even at $20 a month, it's losing money per user. The next tranche has to be able to convert value in a completely different light. And so we fall trap again to the same business model discussion. LLMs in general, when we talk about this from a geopolitical angle, they are, as of today, primarily driven from the United States. And so we also see that the US administration wants to make sure that until they figure out all of these things, we are going to not just invest heavily in them because we're starting to see the $1 trillion markers coming in from government spending. But at the same time, we're also starting to see that the US government wants all the EU, UK, and other nations around the world to not legislate, to not fine big tech from the US. And that is the moat that is required in order for them to continue developing and figuring out what that business model is going to look like. They're trying to game the entire geopolitical system in such a way that big tech can figure out how is it that they can make this a positive.
And before we wrap up this geopolitical discussion, we need to discuss TikTok in the US specifically, and how just earlier this year it was decided by agreement between the Trump administration and the Xi Jinping administration that TikTok in the US would be sold off, spun out of ByteDance, and now it would be controlled entirely, or majority definitely, by US stakeholders. And a big reason that the Trump administration was excited about this, and then later Benjamin Netanyahu also chimed in that he was excited about this, is because this now allowed them to manipulate the content that would be shown on TikTok, which, from a social media perspective, from an advertising perspective, we understand fine. If you own the platform, you get to own the content to some extent that is shown. You at least get to own how it's shown and to what extent it's shown. But how does this all change when AI is introduced?
One of the things is that it's about where is it that people spend time. What could be really interesting is that if social media becomes a data feeder to LLMs in mass, then what you could start seeing is that you use a lot of social media platforms and the people who are generating content for it, and perhaps even bots generating content for it, as the data sources for you to generate results on LLMs. And the reason that this is really important is because this is a weighting issue, right? So if you can start reducing vetted journalism and increasing the weight for social media influencers that are generating content, but also conspiracy content, that can start changing the results dramatically. And I can start seeing that as AI companies are starting to run out of data, that they do need to be able to leverage a lot of this. One thing that we do know is that your perception and your decision making is up for sale. And as a result, this is something that we know players are willing to pay to manipulate it, not just for votes, but actually for many, many other things.
Okay, so let's take that lens because I agree with you, but let's apply the ethical framework to it. Do you personally think that ads are a net benefit to society?
While I say no, that's also because I have worked in the advertising industry and I understand the infrastructure that's in place down to our nervous system almost. The part that I also realize it's an inevitability. It is so deeply entrenched into everyday lives. It is fueling a large, large industry. And I am going way beyond the 1.2 trillion that you were quoting earlier. But the fact is that it also fuels industry in terms of ad agencies and the companies that spend money and have personnel. We can go through all of these different layers of what it is that requires that industry to stay alive. And that is economy. So I can't imagine that it's going to go away, even if I do judge that it is a net negative. Having said that, I also prefer life without advertising. So maybe I'm an anomaly in that sense.
Let's also talk about the benefits, though, because as much as I prefer to not have ads everywhere, I do think there are some substantial benefits. So, when you have ads that are offered on a platform that does subsidize free access to information and services, especially for those who can't or don't want to pay for access to that, would Google search have been as popular if we had to pay to access it? And the same goes for ChatGPT and other AI platforms. And then we always have to use the argument of think about the little guy, the small businesses. How are they going to reach customers? How are they going to become big? They need advertising. And that's actually a classic meta argument. So, pulling a feather out of their hat. They're just there to support the little guys. And that is something that the ad industry does do. Could it be doing it better? Sure. But it is a benefit. And also, it does fund creative industries and journalism when publishers monetize, right? So they're then able to invest that money into publishing other content that maybe assists the creative industry. And so maybe that last one's a bit of a reach, but there are some benefits. Are there harms? Yes, as you mentioned, the surveillance economy is something that I just absolutely detest, and that's what makes me cringe when I think of the ad industry. But I unfortunately don't think you can decouple them.
I do appreciate the things that you're saying, but that's one of the reasons why, for me, as a net negative, it's more about what was the effect into individual people's lives. I know that it's fueled industries, and I have a sincere appreciation for that, even from a capitalistic perspective. And those are the great things that it's done. It's fueled livelihoods, it's fueled careers, it's fueled industries. But at the same time, one of the things is that as we look at it from a human or humanist perspective, what has it taken away? And this is the part where I find it really difficult at the unit economic level that we have not seen a return on that investment in society, but we have seen a return for individuals. And so I know that this is capitalism. I get it. That's not as much of the issue, but this is why I just sense that it's not going to go away, even if it's net negative. But one thing I also wanted to comment on is we were talking earlier about Sam Altman and why is it that he made this code red decision to pull back on ads? And I think that there's so many things converging at this moment, but part of it is that he's apparently really good with reality distortion. He has held all of our gazes for more than 2 years. Let's not joke about that. And he has reached the pinnacle of global stardom, right? When it comes to geopolitical levels, when it comes to the tech levels, when it comes to tech wealth levels. So we know that he's ticked so many of these boxes. And at the same time, he also knows that there is heavy criticism in which a lot of key players, including financial institutions and banks, are waiting for this AI bubble to burst. And so I think that he needs to play this similar to a fundraiser in a startup. How is it that you're going to get a FOMO? It's going to be because you're going to make sure that, you know what, you think that there is no way to be able to cash in on this. I know that there is another way. So I'm going to show you that I'm going to reduce the reliance on ad tech and advertising revenues because there is real money to be made on this. And that is a communication that he is making without having to say it out loud, which is really, really important because at the same time, they still have a long way to go to developing just the technology, let alone their business model.
It comes down to the devil you know versus the devil you don't, right? Part of me is really excited for him to find a revenue stream that isn't going to be the ad industry, but then part of me is slightly terrified that if you're not going to use the ad industry, what are you going to use? Because as awful as it is that society now will really only allow the monetization, the successful monetization of those platforms that invest in the ad industry, I'm nervous to see what Sam Altman would come out with. Excited, nervous. Excited and hopeful, but also nervous and apprehensive. And I actually want to make the same argument for ads that I have been making for AI generally. Ads are a tool, and like any tool, their societal value depends on governance, transparency, and the distribution of economic gains. So maybe the reason that we're not huge fans of the ad industry is because all of those levers haven't been pulled in a smart way, in a way that actually cares for the end consumer, the end user. And that's why whenever we talk about AI, it's something that we always push. It's always like, okay, well, why don't we think about this in a more positive way? What would need to be true in order for this situation to not arise in this way? It's also important to recognize that advertising funds so much that's free, but it shouldn't cost us our privacy, our sanity, or, to your point that you made earlier, our democracy. Thanks for listening in. Tune in next week for our next episode. See you then.